Well, if you have your Bibles, your bodies, hope you have your bodies. Hope you're having an out-of-body experience. Maybe did put my other mouth in, I guess. All right, let's go ahead and begin. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Genesis 44. We are rapidly moving towards the end of the Bible's record of Joseph's life. We have seen the rise of Joseph and the lowering of Joseph in the houses of Jacob, Potiphar, and the prison, before God places Joseph in a place of honor and authority in Pharaoh's house. God also gave Joseph a wife, children, a house of his own, and where he has forgotten his former troubles and his former family. But God has brought his unresolved family issues back into his life in this last story arc, where so far we've seen 3 sub-story arcs within that, where we saw the first visit from the 10, the unexpected, where we saw at the end Joseph decides to take and keep Simeon there as security and sends the rest of them back and tells them to bring Benjamin back so they can buy more grain and release Simeon. And Joseph is saying that they are spies. And in order to prove that they're not spies, they need to bring their brother Benjamin back. And we know as the reader that this is just a way to get Benjamin down there so he can see Benjamin again. And in the first story arc, we saw the 10 bow down over the issue of grain. So the first dream that Joseph had over 20 years ago was fulfilled. In between, we have the second story arc, was the brothers going back home and facing their father. Their father didn't want to send Benjamin down in the first place. And so now they have that conflict of will Jacob allow Benjamin to go down? And at the end of that story arc, he refuses. And that's a huge problem. And then in the third story arc, last week in Genesis 43, we saw a return visit. The famine continued. They were in trouble. They needed to go down and get more grain. So Jacob tried everything he could do to keep Benjamin from going down. But Judah and the rest of the sons would not go down without Benjamin. And he was forced to trust God and do the right thing and send Benjamin. And in this return visit, we saw that now that all 11 had bowed down before Joseph. So we have a partial fulfillment of his second dream, which had the 11 stars. But we haven't seen the sun or the moon come. So at the end of the story arc here in Genesis 43, we are left with an implicit problem. We did not go over that last week, so I want to read you just a couple of key passages from last week just to show you the problem. In 43:29, it says, "And he," referring to Joseph, "lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son." And then skipping down, it says, and he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." And Joseph hurried out, for he was deeply stirred, had compassion over his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber, most private place he could find, and wept there. And then down in 34, he took portions to them from his own table. But Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they feasted and drank freely with him. In this scene, we saw in the whole chapter that the brothers weren't called brothers. They were called men. And Joseph was called the man. Continually, he took out that relational aspect, which we saw in chapter 37, was emphasized that there were brothers, and yet they were treating Joseph so horribly. Unlike any brother should never be treated that way, especially Christians, those who are the people of God, who are designed to be a witness to the world of God and his grace and his mercy and his love. And so this chapter here, it's a literary device that's being used as to indicate that they don't have a family relationship, that there's relationships that were broken. So then all of a sudden we see here, when it describes Benjamin, it's now his brother, his mother's son, and Joseph calls him my son, and he weeps over him, and he gives him a blessing. It shows us that relationship between Joseph and Benjamin, that was never broken. And from a literary perspective, it was saying that those that were not damaged and torn apart by sin, there's a huge blessing that's involved with that relationship. And Joseph has just restored his relationship with his full brother. But now what? The brothers came down for grain and to show their innocence with Benjamin. So what's the next step? What are they going to do? They're going to want to go home. So the implicit conflict is, how does Joseph keep his brother there in Egypt? He's just reunited with his brother. He doesn't want to lose him again. How does he retain that? Which leads us to what we're going to read about today, which is the life of Joseph, the two plans that we're going to read in chapter 44. So this morning we're going to look at two plans concerning the future of Benjamin. The first plan refers to Joseph's plan to keep Benjamin in Egypt. Verses 1 through 17. And then verses 1 through 5, we see the plan to keep Benjamin divulged. He's sharing this with his steward, his house steward, the one who controls all the affairs within his household. Verses 1 and 2 say, Then he commanded his house steward, saying, Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of the sack. Put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph had told him. So while the brothers are sleeping, they had a huge feast, and they drank freely, and they were probably slightly merry from the wine, and ate quite a bit. And if you eat quite a bit, you're going to sleep. Just after a big Thanksgiving meal, it's not the tryptophan in the turkey, it's the amount of calories you're taking in. So they're sleeping well. And while they're sleeping, Joseph does three things. Number one, he returns their money. This is the second time he's done this. He's returned their silver inside their bags. He's being gracious. He's being kind to them, generous to them. Number two, he's also being generous in that he tells the steward to fill the sacks as much as they can carry. Not as much as they paid, but as much as they can carry. He's giving them more. So they can, when they go back, they can feed their families in Canaan. And number three, he's planting evidence. He's putting a silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Now that's insurance that he could convict Benjamin of theft and thus keep him here in Egypt. Notice again here in this chapter, we're continuing with the narrative is calling them men instead of brothers or who they are. It's keeping that generic designation because their relationship has not been restored yet. Moving on to verse 3, it says, As soon as it was light, the men were sent away, they with their donkeys. They had just gone out of the city and were not far off when Joseph said to his house steward, Up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and which he indeed uses for divination? You have done wrong in doing this. So it's now, the sun has risen. Obviously the brothers slept over. They stayed at Joseph's estate, and it's morning. And they set them up with the donkeys and head them out, and they go some distances out past the walls, past the gates, not very far, and Joseph immediately sends his steward out. And the question I have to ask is why? Why so soon? Why do it immediately? Well, it's very important that they don't reach the next lodge, that they don't go too far. Because the brothers, the last time they took this trip and were going home, when they first reached the lodge and untied their sacks and brought them down, that's when they found the money. So if you were the brothers in that situation, I think you wouldn't go too much further outside the city before you lowered it and checked again. And if they'd done that, they might have found the cup and turned right around and delivered it back. So Joseph had to catch them in the act of taking it away in order to accuse them. So that's why he sends them out quickly in order for his plan to work, to catch them in the act. So this is his cup, his chalice. It's a goblet shaped, and it's all in silver. And notice it says, Joseph is telling him to say, this is the one in which my Lord drinks, in which he indeed uses divination. Divination in a cup? That seems odd to us in a number of accounts, a number of reasons. In the ancient world, there are two ways that cups were used for divination. Number one, there was legomancy, which is the interpretation of oil that was dropped into water or liquid. And whatever way the globs or the oil would move, they could make interpretations of it. And then another thing they did was called a hydromancy, which was the interpretation of reflections in the water itself, either the ripples or the way the light went or the way the light went out, and they would make certain predictions. Now, this particular practice of divination, of doing these things, is prohibited in the law that's going to be written in a few hundred years later. Deuteronomy 18:10, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens or sorceries. You see, it's bound up in the magical arts. And it's prohibited for the people of God to do. So at this time, obviously, Joseph doesn't have the written law, but that would still be passed down to him. That's not something that he's supposed to be doing. So why is he saying it? Why would Joseph tell his steward to tell them about this, that this cup was used this way? Well, if Joseph is number 2 in all of Egypt, that is what a typical pagan Egyptian ruler would do. They would all do that. That would be a common practice for them. So in telling a steward to continue this thought and put this thought in their mind, he's maintaining his cover as an Egyptian non-believer ruler. So when the steward is going to tell them that this is the cup in which my Lord drinks and in which he uses divination, it adds, number one, that this cup is special to the master. So it's not just any old cup. It's his cup, his personal cup. Number two, if he practices divination in it, then it would also be plausible that he would practice divination with other things. And he would know exactly that his cup was missing and who took it, because he could find out from the other sources of divination that he uses. And then number three, it seems to bring a spiritual element into the scene, where the gods of Egypt themselves are now against the brothers. It puts them in a more precarious situation. Okay, so that's the plan to keep Benjamin divulged. Verses 6 through 13, we see it enacted. Verse 6 says, so he, the steward, overtook them and spoke these words to them. They, the brothers, said to him, why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks, we have brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die. And we also will be your Lord's slaves. The brothers are simply protesting their innocence. And they're pointing out their past behavior to try to vindicate themselves and saying, look, we're not thieves. Thieves don't return money. We returned money, the gold, the silver that we found. We wouldn't do that if we were common thieves. So they are so sure that none of the brothers have stolen anything that they make a rash vow, saying that the one who has stolen the cup or anything would be put to death, would be guilty of death, and that the rest of them would be the slaves of the Egyptian ruler forever. In this time, slavery was forever. And that meant that they would be willing to abandon everything in their life to become a slave. That's how sure they are. They're trying to convince them. They're showing family solidarity. They're not saying, hey, the one that's guilty, let him pay for it. They're saying, no, we will all stand with our family because we know our family's innocent. And we don't do things like that. Verse 10, he goes on to say, so he said, now let it also be according to your words. This is the steward talking to the brothers. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and the rest of you shall be innocent. Remember, the steward knows exactly what's going on, so he knows who has the cup and who doesn't. Then they hurried. Each man lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack. He searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes. And when each man loaded his donkey, they returned to the city. So the steward, when hearing the brothers speak, he agrees with their assessment that the guilty party should indeed be punished, but not to the extremes that the brothers were suggesting. The brothers, they're going to be innocent. They can leave. They can go. But the guilty party, they're the one. That's the one that has to stay. Remember, this is all part of Joseph's plan to keep Benjamin and let their brothers go. And the brothers will be no more the wiser that Joseph is still alive. You notice the brothers do this in verse 11. They were hurried in lowering down their sacks. They're thinking, okay, the faster you examine the sacks, the faster we can go. And this can all be cleared up. So let's get it down quickly, let's do it. And it's amazing. Again, the steward starts with the eldest and works down, probably because of what he saw yesterday with the arrangement at the banquet feast, but also probably Joseph told him specifically how to do it. And it builds literally suspense into the story, because in each time they open up a sack of the eldest, and then the next one, and the next one, and it's innocent, innocent, innocent. The brothers have to be saying, and each time their guard is going down, their confidence is going up, and and then all of a sudden, in the very last sack, there it is. Their joy and their confidence have been broken, all in an instant. That shock and that awe. And remind you, they're in a very happy place right now because, one, they're going home with the grain, mission accomplished. They're going back with Benjamin, second mission accomplished, and they're going back with Simeon. Everything was working out perfectly for them. And then this. So then, they tore their clothes. That is a common sign in the ancient world of mourning, a sign of mourning and of deep emotional distress. The kind of idea is when you do it as a physical sign, because why would you ever go around with clothes that are torn? It shows that there's something is not right with you. Just like your clothes are unkempt, your emotional state is also unkempt. And you notice it is their clothes. They all did it. They were all emotionally disturbed. Again, it shows family solidarity. They were a unity. They were in harmony. They cared for their brother. They knew what this meant for their whole family and for their father, for them. And they didn't just say, oh, well, see you, Benjamin. They loaded up their donkeys and they returned to the city. They were innocent, and yet they were returning. They weren't going to leave. This brings us to verses 14 through 17, where we see the plan to keep Benjamin announced. Verse 14, we see when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell to the ground before him. Joseph said to him, "What is this deed that you have done? Do you not know that such a man as I can indeed practice divination?" Again, we see the divination issue there, which we scratch our heads at. What is Joseph supposed to be? A godly man, a faithful man. He's playing the part. He's giving them a plausible explanation of how he knew that cup was there and how quickly he knew how the cup was there in that sack. They needed to be able to believe it, and he told them the right story. In verse 16, it says, "So Judah said, 'What can we say to my Lord? What can we speak? And how can we justify ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's slaves, both we and the one in whose possession the cup has been found.'" So notice, Judah here is saying three things. Number one, we all can't prove our innocence. There's nothing we can say to prove our innocence. Nothing that will be believable. Number two, he's saying that God is in control. And that God has found out the iniquity of your servants. The idea of being found out is that it was seeking something that was missed. It's the idea that God has not punished them for their past crimes. In Judah's mind, he's saying, we have past crimes. He's not divulging this because we know he's innocent. So he's not guilty of stealing anything right now. But he's saying that God has finally going to punish them. That they're, in his mind, the guilt that they have is finally caught up with them. That their time has come for selling Joseph into slavery, and they need to pay for it. Not true, but in his mind, it is. He's still feeling that guilt. And then number 3, they are staying together and committing themselves as slaves. They are staying as a family. If one is being punished, they're all going to be punished. Now we need to realize when we read this, it just seems like, okay, they're staying, they're going to be slaves. Realize what this means. This is huge. This means that they're leaving their families. They're leaving their wives, they're leaving their children, they're leaving their father and their mother. They're leaving all of their possessions, their land, all of their future. They're leaving. They're viewing family and their relationships within the family as being more important. Look at verse 17. It says, "But he said, far be it from me to do this. The man in whose possession the cup has been found, he shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." So Joseph's not allowing it. He's saying no. He's promoting that justice be done. He doesn't want all of them punished, just the one who's guilty. That's fascinating. He's the one that's deceiving them, but this is what he's saying. You know, he's saying just no, let's not punish the innocent. So he gives them an out. Go in peace. Go, you're on good terms. Now remember, this is only 2 years into the famine, so Joseph knows full well that they're going to be coming back. And so go in peace. You can come back later, and we can have business, and we'll be on friendly terms. Go back to your father. So Joseph knows that they'll be back. So if you can imagine this, these brothers, they're finding themselves in almost the same situation as they were in 20 years ago. Practically the same situation with Joseph. Instead of Joseph, it's Benjamin now. Benjamin is now in trouble. He's going to be a slave. And the brothers are going to go back to their father who doesn't know any better. What are they going to do? Are they just going to abandon them, take the money that they have, and lie to their father? Or are these men, have they changed? It's really a second chance. It's a second try. And this is the same, Benjamin is the son of Rachel. It's the father's favorite. It's the same situation. Are they still jealous enough? Do they still hate him? Do they want him out of the picture? Did they learn anything? So we need to ask, when we're finishing this portion, we need to ask an important question is, what is Joseph doing? Why is he continuing this masquerade? If you think about it, he's putting them through a lot. And if you wanted to know their character, you'd already known that. Many of the commentaries and even some of the ancient languages interpret this as Joseph has this all planned out. I don't think he has this planned out at all. But his plan is just simply, how do I get Benjamin here and get the brothers out? At any time he could have revealed who he was. Why is he waiting? We know from the text that he has forgiven his brothers. He is not, meaning he's not enacting punishment. He's not taking vengeance on them. And, other than he's given threats and he's kept Simeon to ensure that Benjamin comes back. But that's all part of his ultimate plan to get Benjamin safe in Egypt under his care. He's actually acted kindly to them. In the sense that he's given them grain at no cost, returned their money. He's given them extra grain. He's given them provisions for the travel. He's given them a feast. And he's wished them well and said, peace be to you. You can come on back and we'll do this again. So he's not taking vengeance, but that's not enough. He may have forgiven them. That's not enough. He is not willing or ready to be reconciled with them. He doesn't want them to be part of his life. He's putting up a wall in this disguise. And he's trying to keep them that way. And you can understand that. Joseph was hurt, and his brothers are bringing back all those painful memories. And really, he doesn't really want to let them in to have a second go at it, even if they supposedly had changed. This is Joseph's plan, to keep Benjamin and let the brothers go along with business, not knowing any the wiser. So we see that this is his plan, but we also see that God's not going to allow him to stay in this state. He's not going to allow Joseph to continue like this. He's going to bring him all the way. Just like the brothers are being forced to deal with the situation with their brother, their guilt, their past, just like Jacob was forced to deal with his fear and trusting in God and doing what was right in terms of Benjamin, Joseph as well is going to be forced to do what is right, being a child of God. So here, although that's Joseph's plan, this is Benjamin's plan. Judah's plan. Judah's plan to return Benjamin. Verse 18 through 34. And in the first section, verses 18 through 32, we see Judah explains their situation. Now this is the longest speech in Genesis. And in this long section, verses 18 through 34, the first part here, Judah basically goes over the situation, goes over the story. And he's adding nothing new to the narrative. We know all of these facts, all the things that he's saying. But he does arrange it in such a way to emphasize certain things. So let me start, 18 through 23. It says, Then Judah approached him and said, O my Lord, may your servant please speak a word in my Lord's ears, and do not be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh. For my Lord asked his servants, saying, Have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, We have an old father and a little child of his old age. Now his brother is dead, so he alone is left to his mother, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. But we said to my Lord, The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. You said to his servants, however, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face. Notice Judah is speaking humbly. He's using third-person language, your servant. Do not be angry, meaning please be patient with me. Let me explain the situation and the predicament that we're in. He's acknowledging that Benjamin is his father's favorite. And that acknowledgement is actually important because Judah and the rest of the brothers are acknowledging the situation and they're acting above it. It was Jacob's love of Joseph that caused his brother to hate him. And now this same favoritism is cited as grounds for mercy. The other brothers, or at least Judah here, but Judah is speaking for the other brothers, have accepted that the love of their father, for their father, must override all other grudges. They understand that their father has a favorite, but that doesn't affect how they need to love and honor their father. And he addresses Joseph as equal to Pharaoh. You have the power to punish or to pardon. So he's pleading for mercy here. Moving on, verse 24 through 29, he says, Thus it came about, when we went up to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. Our father said, Go back, buy us a little food. But we said, We cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down. For we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm befalls him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. So Judah is continuing in the narrative, continuing the story, and this occasion right here is the first time that Joseph is hearing about what actually happened when he left, what his father's reaction actually was. He's never heard that before. This is 20 years ago, and he's hearing that his father believes that he was torn to pieces, and that brought him great sorrow, and that the pain and sorrow of losing Joseph, it still haunts his father. He also hears why they delayed in returning to Egypt with Benjamin. It's because of fear, and still that grief of losing another son. And again, Judah, while he's using these words, he's accepting that Rachel was Jacob, their father's wife, love, and that Joseph and Benjamin have a different standing. They're accepting that. That's part of the reality of the way things are. So notice that there's nothing new in the narrative, but what does the narrative do? It leaves out quite a bit of information, and it focuses our attention on the strong bond of love between Jacob, their father, and between Benjamin. It focuses in on that aspect. Now Judah continues by explaining that what he believes will happen in the future if he does not return to Canaan with Benjamin. He says, now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, when he sees that the lad is not with us, he will die. Thus your servants will bring the gray hair of your servant our father down to Sheol in sorrow. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then let me bear the blame before my father forever. So notice again the language, the servant-master language there, showing honor and deference. Judah is not blaming Joseph for the situation, for what will happen. But he's explaining that he is putting them in a position that will force them to bring harm to their father. Greater suffering, greater sorrow. And from a literary standpoint, this retelling of the pertinent information in the narrative, it leads us to a climactic breaking point. All the story here is coming to a point right here. And in the next two verses, we see Judah's acts in honor. This is the climax of the story, of the narrative. And this is where Judah says, now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad, a slave to my Lord. And let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me? For fear that I see the evil that would overtake my father. This is a beautiful act of Judah. Judah is willing to exchange his life, his freedom, his family, his future, in order to do two things. Number one, to keep his word. He was surety. He gave himself to his father as surety, that Benjamin would return. So he's willing to fulfill that promise. And number two, he would give up everything so as to not cause his father more pain, more harm. So he is acting out of sacrificial love for his father. In this act, we see ultimately the claim of his brothers, of Judah himself, by saying that they are honorable, honest, righteous men. And here is proof positive. And yes, they are. They have become honorable men. Now, this is not the same Judah that we learned about 20 years ago, or even the same Judah that would not give his third son to Tamar. God has done a miraculous work in his life. And remember, Judah is the one that suggested that we sell Joseph into slavery and make a few shekels. So you can see the horrible person that he used to be is completely different now. God has done a tremendous work. And what does that show us? It shows us that no one is ever too far gone to be, that they can't be transformed by the power of God. Any of us are never too bad, too wicked, too horrible, too evil for God not to change us. But it is all in God's timing and in His power. And we need to be those who are faithful to Him, to obedient to Him, to lay our lives down. So here we see that Judah is acting as a family. He's acting like brothers should act. And treating his brothers and his father in a way that's honoring. Before, they selfishly acted, ready at any given moment to cause harm to their father, to their other brothers. They didn't care as long as it worked out for them. It was selfish. It was sinful. Now, it's the exact opposite. They are selflessly ready to take the harm, take the guilt, so that their brothers and their father wouldn't have harm. Can we say this about our own families? How do you treat the people in your family that you immediately work with and live with and interact with? Are you bringing them joy? Are you making a safe, loving atmosphere? Are you willing to take that suffering, take that pain, so that they won't have to experience? Are you sacrificially loving them, those that are around you? Are you using your time, resources, and person to bring about good? Or are you bringing about harm? Now, I want to address one more thing before we end, and that is Joseph. What is Joseph going through right now? I don't think Joseph expected these things to happen. I don't think he expected two particular things. Number one, he didn't expect this demonstration of sacrificial love from Judah. This is not the guy he knew. I don't know in your experiences, but if I knew someone when I was a kid, I still think of them that way. So now he just remembers Judah as he was. Now he's seeing a completely different man, and I don't think he expects it. And then number two, I don't think Joseph realized that his plan to keep Benjamin would have a traumatic effect on Jacob, on his father. I don't think he realized that this deception that he's carrying on would have a negative effect. And we see in the narrative here that Joseph is almost going into a category of where his brothers were 20 years ago. He is planning to deceive his father and acting almost like the brothers, and will cause great pain and harm to his father by keeping Benjamin. So to continue this cruelty, this deception, would not really be loving or honorable or honoring to Jacob. And here, God is forcing him not only to forgive, but also to take that step that he needs, that uncomfortable step of reconciliation with his brothers who have changed. So here we see both a climax in terms of the brothers and then Joseph. He's forgiven them, but will he now be restored with them? Will he make that first step and put himself back in their lives? Or will he stay silent and cause his father extreme dishonor and pain and sorrow because he wants to reconnect with Benjamin? Those are the two plans. And we're leaving the story and a cliffhanger. You know what happens. But I'm doing this on purpose because the tension, the rise is there. And we need to, we cannot go into the next portion to answer that until next week. So let's move on to applications, because there's really some important applications here in this chapter. And number one, we see the brothers standing by one another. Each is accepting the other's faith as his own. There's solidarity in their family. Is there harmony in your family? Do you look out for the welfare of your brothers and sisters? Are you someone they can trust to bring good and not harm? That is, remember, this whole narrative is showing what does it mean to be honorable men and women. So that is a characteristic of it. Number two, Judah made a brave promise in placing himself as surety for Benjamin. Even when faced with a life of slavery, away from his wife, his children, his home, his country, he stepped forward to fulfill his promise. This is what it means to be a man or woman of honor, taking responsibility for the promises you make, even when that means personal sacrifice. Number 3, Judah was determined not to bring pain or harm to his father because he loved him, even when he wasn't the favorite child. He is honoring to his father. Love rises above the insults, the unmet expectations, and the disappointments. It moves for the good of the beloved. One thing to emphasize there is we sometimes automatically think that people have to earn our love, or I'm not going to love them unless they love me. And that's exactly opposite what Jesus said. If you love only those who love you, what good are you? You're the same as any Gentile, any non-believer. Love is a choice that we make, and it's something that doesn't change no matter the circumstances. Okay, number 4. In this climactic chapter, we see the characters of the brothers truly becoming the honest men that they claim to be. It's a beautiful illustration showing that God does change people. If you think someone is beyond hope, or think that you are beyond hope, come and seek the God who does impossible things. Number 5, Joseph was forgiven, or has forgiven his brothers, and is secretly kind to them, but he's building a wall in his disguise to evade the relationship. It is not enough to forgive others who have harmed you when you know that they have repented. God's will is to bring peace and restoration into the relationships of his people, not to settle for anything less than God's best for you. Take the difficult step towards peace. Okay, is there anything you want to add or anything you want to ask about that? Now I know I'm not taking a typical